Hello, and welcome aboard the Midnight Express. Make yourself comfortable as we take you on a journey that will lead you off the main line and down a mysterious track, leading to destinations unknown. If you enjoy our stories, please take the time to like and subscribe. Thank you. And now, we present tonight's tale.
The cab of the Ford F-350 high railer smelled of stale coffee, wet canvas, and the sharp chemical tang of ozone that seemed to cling to Kyle Atkins's clothes no matter how many times he washed them. Outside, the October rain wasn't falling so much as it was hanging in the air, a thick, misty suspension that turned the headlights into useless, milky cones. Kyle rubbed his eyes, feeling the grit of a double shift under his eyelids. The dashboard clock read 2:14 a.m.
Control to Signal 4.
The radio crackled, the voice of the dispatcher cutting through the hum of the heater.
What's your 20, Kyle?
Kyle grabbed the mic, his thumb brushing the textured plastic. Signal 4. I'm passing milepost 88, just turning off the highway onto the access road for South Bend. ETA, 5 minutes.
Copy that, Signal 4. We're still getting intermittent dropouts on the switch position at South Bend siding. Board shows it flickering open, then closed, then tumbling. We've got the westbound Silver Star due through that block in 30 minutes. I need a visual confirmation and a hard lock on that switch before I can give them the green.
Copy. I'll clamp it if I have to, Kyle said. Signal 4 out. He hung up the mic and sighed. South Bend. Of all the places on the subdivision to have a glitch on a raining Tuesday night, it had to be South Bend. The siding was a relic, a long stretch of secondary track running parallel to the main line, situated in a valley that seemed to trap fog and silence in equal measure. There were no houses for miles, just dense pine forests and the rocky crags of the foothills. It was a place that felt older than the railroad itself. It was also, if you listened to the old-timers in the break room, haunted as hell. Earlier that evening, before he'd headed out, Kyle had been nursing a coffee while Old Man Miller, a dispatcher who had been riding the rails since the dying days of steam, held court. "You drew the short straw, kid," Miller had wheezed, his face looking like crumpled parchment. "South Bend on a wet night? Rather you than me." "It's just a bad relay, Miller," Kyle had replied, checking his tool belt. "Moisture gets in the box, shorts the contacts. Physics, not phantoms." Miller had leaned in, his eyes milky and serious. "Physics didn't kill those 18 folks in 44, Kyle. Negligence did. And bad luck. You know the story. The Midnight Limited. Engineer missed the red aspect because of the fog, just like tonight. Switch was left open by a green brakeman. Train hit the siding at 60 miles an hour. But the siding didn't merge back then. It was a dead end." Miller paused for dramatic effect, a trick he'd mastered over 40 years. "Went right off the end of the track. Plowed into the mud and the trees. Boiler exploded. Screams heard for miles, they say. But by the time help got there, just silence." "I know the story, Miller," Kyle said, zipping up his high-visibility jacket. "Everyone knows the story. They say the switch tries to open itself," Miller whispered, ignoring Kyle's dismissal. "If you see a light out there, Kyle, don't stare at it. Just run." "I'll keep that in mind," Kyle had said, rolling his eyes as he walked out into the rain. Now, bouncing down the gravel access road, the truck's suspension groaning in protest, Kyle forced a chuckle. It was easy to be skeptical in the bright fluorescent light of the depot. Out here, where the darkness pressed against the glass like a physical weight, the story had a different weight to it. He crested a small rise and saw the tracks below. The main line was a streak of wet silver reflecting the moonlight that was fighting to break through the clouds. The siding was a darker shadow alongside it. Kyle parked the truck near the bungalow, the silver metal shed that housed the electronic logic for the signals. He killed the engine. The silence rushed in immediately, heavy and oppressive. The only sound was the tick, tick, tick of the cooling engine and the soft hiss of rain on the gravel ballast. He grabbed his heavy mag light, his tool bag, and the master keys. Stepping out of the truck, the cold air bit at his exposed neck. He zipped his collar up to his chin and walked toward the tracks. First order of business? The switch. It was a standard power-operated switch, a massive piece of steel machinery designed to guide a train from one track to another. Kyle shone his light on the points, the tapered rails that moved back and forth. They were tight against the stock rail. Visually, the switch was lined for the main move. It was closed. He walked over to the signal mast. The light above was burning a steady, solid green. Clear. Weird, Kyle muttered. He knelt by the switch machine, unlocking the heavy steel cover. Inside, the gears and rods were slick with grease. He checked the circuit controller, the contacts that told the dispatch computer whether the switch was safe. Everything looked pristine. No water intrusion, no frayed wires, no evidence of rodents chewing the insulation. He pulled out his multimeter and tested the voltage. Steady 12 volts, no fluctuation. He stood up, wiping his hands on his pants, and keyed his portable radio. Control, this is Signal 4.
Go ahead, Kyle.
I'm at the switch. Visual inspection confirms points are lined and locked for the main. Signal aspect is green. Internal logic checks out. No ground faults. Voltage is steady. Whatever you were seeing on the board, it's not happening here. It's solid. There was a pause on the other end.
Copy that, Signal 4. We're showing it solid closed now, too. Must have been a communication glitch in the code line. Keep an eye on it. Silver Star is 10 minutes out.
Copy. I'll stand by until she passes.
Roger. And Kyle? Watch out for the ghost train.
The dispatcher chuckled. Very funny, Control. Signal 4 out. Kyle clipped the radio to his chest harness. He looked up and down the line. The tracks stretched into nothingness in both directions. To the west, the direction the train was coming from, the rails converged into a single point in the dark. He sat on the running board of his truck, drinking water from a canteen, waiting. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a dripping, echoing stillness. Then, he heard it. A low rumble felt in the soles of his boots before it was heard. The Silver Star. Minutes later, the headlight cut through the gloom, a blinding star growing larger by the second. The horn blared, 2 long, 1 short, 1 long, the standard crossing sequence, though there was no crossing here. Just habit, or perhaps the engineer warning the deer to scatter. Kyle stood back a safe distance, holding his flashlight steady so the crew would know he was there and not an obstruction. The passenger train roared past. A blur of silver steel, lit windows, and the rhythmic clack-clack whoosh of the wheels. He saw silhouettes of passengers in the dining car, heads bowed over late-night meals, completely unaware of the man standing in the wet gravel or the history of the ground they were speeding over. The wind buffet hit him, tugging at his clothes. And then, as quickly as it arrived, the train was gone, its red taillights fading around the long curve to the east. Kyle let out a breath. Control, Signal 4. Silver Star is by. Switch held. No issues. Silence. Kyle frowned. He pressed the button again. Control, Signal 4. Do you copy? Static. Not the soft hiss of an open channel, but a harsh, rhythmic crackle, like someone crumbling dry leaves into a microphone. Control, check. Radio check. Nothing. Kyle looked up at the signal mast. He froze. The light, which should have turned red immediately after the train passed, indicating the block was occupied, was doing something impossible. It was flickering. Green, red, dark, green, red. It wasn't a code. It was a spasm. "What the hell?" Kyle whispered. He walked back toward the tracks. As he approached the switch, the air temperature plummeted. It wasn't a gradual shift, it was instant, like stepping into a walk-in freezer. His breath bloomed in white clouds in the beam of his flashlight. The silence of the woods changed. The crickets and the dripping water stopped. In their place, a low, thrumming vibration began to rise from the rails themselves. Kyle looked at the switch. The heavy steel throwing rod was vibrating. "Control!" Kyle shouted into the radio. "I have a signal malfunction. Major failure at South Bend. Do you copy?" Crackle. Hiss. Pop. He grabbed his cell phone. No service. He swore, shoving it back into his pocket. The signal light above him flared, bright white, the color it wasn't even capable of producing, then shattered. Sparks rained down onto the wet ballast. Then came the sound. It wasn't the roar of a diesel engine. It was a rhythmic, breathing sound. Chuff, chuff, chuff. Heavy, wet, metallic. Kyle spun around, aiming his flashlight down the dead-end siding. The beam of light hit a wall of fog that hadn't been there seconds ago. The fog swirled violently, illuminated from within by a dull amber glow. Kyle took a step back, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. "This isn't real," he muttered. "Lack of sleep. Electrical discharge." The fog parted. Emerging from the mist, looming over him like a leviathan of iron and oil, was the front of a steam locomotive. It was immense, blacker than the night around it, slick with condensation. The pilot wheels ground against the rusty rails of the siding. The single headlight, a glowing yellow eye, burned with an intensity that made Kyle squint. He could smell it now. Not the ozone of the storm, but the sulfurous stench of burning coal and the hot copper scent of superheated steam. The locomotive was moving slowly, creeping toward the switch. Kyle stood paralyzed. The number plate on the front of the smoke box was visible in the glare. 404. The number of the train that crashed in 1944. "No," Kyle gasped. "No, no, no." The cab of the engine passed him. He looked up, expecting to see nothing, or perhaps a rotting corpse. Instead, he saw a figure leaning out the window. The engineer. He wore a striped cap and goggles. His face was pale, translucent, like wax paper held up to a candle. He looked directly at Kyle. The figure didn't look angry. He looked terrified. He pointed frantically down the line toward the east, toward where the Silver Star had just gone. The steam whistle shrieked, a sound so loud and mournful it vibrated in Kyle's teeth. Woo! The ghost train was picking up speed. It was heading for the switch. Kyle realized with a jolt of horror that the switch was still lined for the main line. If this thing, this spectral tonnage, hit the switch in the closed position coming from the siding, it would run through the switch, damaging it, potentially derailing. Or, if it merged onto the main line, it would be behind the Silver Star. "I have to stop it," Kyle thought, though the logic of stopping a ghost with a padlock key was insane. He lunged for the ground throw, the manual lever used to operate the switch by hand. He jammed his key into the padlock, his fingers fumbling in the cold. He tore the lock off and grabbed the heavy iron handle. He threw his weight against it, trying to open the switch to let the phantom train merge smoothly, or perhaps derail it. He didn't know. He just knew he had to do something. The lever wouldn't budge. It felt welded solid. The locomotive's drive wheels, massive spinning discs of steel, churned past him. The ground shook violently. Kyle was thrown backward, landing hard in the gravel. He watched, helpless, as the ghost train smashed through the switch. There was no sound of tearing metal, no crunch of breaking ties. The locomotive simply passed through the steel rails of the main line as if they were made of smoke. The tender followed, then a string of heavyweight passenger cars. They were dark green, the paint faded and peeling. Through the dusty windows, Kyle saw shapes. People. Men in fedoras, women in hats, soldiers in uniform. They sat motionless, staring straight ahead. The last car, an observation car with a rounded rear platform, swept past. The train was now on the main line. It was accelerating, moving unnaturally fast, ignoring the laws of friction and inertia. It was chasing the Silver Star. Kyle scrambled to his feet. The flight response took over. He couldn't stay here. He sprinted to his truck, threw it into gear, and slammed on the gas. The tires spun in the mud before catching the gravel. He fishtailed onto the frontage road that ran parallel to the tracks. He floored it. The V8 engine roared, the speedometer climbing to 60, 70, 80. To his left, the ghost train was a streak of darkness and amber light. It was pacing him, or rather, he was barely keeping pace with it. The trail of smoke from its stack flattened out against the roof of the cars, a dark ribbon blotting out the stars. Kyle grabbed the radio mic again, screaming into the static. "Mayday! Mayday! Control, stop the star! Stop the star! There's a runaway on the main!" Static. He threw the mic down. He had to warn them. But how? The road dipped and weaved, following the contours of the river valley. Kyle fought the steering wheel, the truck bouncing violently over potholes. Ahead, he saw the red taillights of the Silver Star. The modern diesel train was cruising at about 60 miles per hour. The ghost train was doing 80. It was closing the gap with terrifying speed. "It's going to hit them," Kyle whispered, tears of wind and terror streaming from his eyes. "It's going to rear-end them." He watched, knuckles white on the steering wheel, as the phantom steam engine closed to within yards of the modern train's rear blinking red light. Kyle braced for the impact, for the explosion, for the screech of twisting metal. But there was no impact. The ghost train didn't slow down. It didn't collide. As the cowcatcher of the steam engine touched the rear coupler of the Silver Star, the ghost train began to lose its cohesion. The solid black iron dissolved into a swirling, violent gray mist. The mist rushed forward, engulfing the rear car of the passenger train. Kyle watched in disbelief as the cloud of spiritual energy passed through the Silver Star. It flowed like water through a screen door. It rushed through the dining car, through the sleepers, through the baggage car. The Silver Star kept moving, seemingly unaffected, though Kyle could imagine the sudden chill, the flicker of lights, the unease washing over the passengers inside. The mist shot out the front of the Silver Star's lead diesel locomotive. And then, in a flash of blinding light that lit up the entire valley, the mist re-solidified. The ghost train was now in front of the Silver Star. It was solid again. The amber headlight cut the dark. The steam whistle blew, short, sharp blasts. Warning, warning, warning. The brake lights of the Silver Star suddenly flared bright red. The engineer of the passenger train had seen it. A train had appeared out of nowhere, directly in his path. Kyle slammed on his own brakes as the road curved sharply toward the tracks. He could hear the squeal of the Silver Star's emergency brakes, the sparks flying from the wheels as the massive train locked up, sliding on the wet rails. The ghost train stayed just ahead of it, matching its deceleration, leading it. They were approaching Sanders Creek. The road rose up a hill, giving Kyle a vantage point. The tracks curved around the base of the hill and onto the Sanders Creek trestle, a massive wooden structure spanning a dry creek bed that was usually just a trickle of water this time of year. Kyle crested the hill and slammed on his brakes, skidding to a halt. His mouth fell open. The world ahead was orange. The Sanders Creek trestle was an inferno. A brush fire, likely started by a lightning strike from the storm earlier, had ignited the dry, creosote-soaked timbers of the bridge. The middle section of the bridge was gone, collapsed into the ravine below. The rest was a skeleton of fire. If the Silver Star had come around that curve at full speed, Kyle watched as the ghost train rolled onto the burning bridge. It didn't fall. It didn't burn. It rode on rails of air across the gap where the bridge used to be. As the steam engine reached the center of the inferno, it exploded, not into shrapnel, but into a massive cloud of white steam. White fragments of light burst from within the steam and shot upward into the night sky, spiraling away into the darkness. The rest of the ghost train followed, car by car, dissolving into the smoke and the flames, vanishing as if it had never been there. Behind it, the Silver Star slid, metal screaming against metal. It slowed, slower, slower. The lead diesel engine stopped 50 yards short of the burning abyss. The silence that followed was heavier than anything Kyle had ever felt. The only sound was the crackle of the burning bridge and the heavy, panting idle of the Silver Star's diesel engines. Then, a burst of static from the truck's radio.
Control. Star. Emergency. Stopped. Bridge is out. Repeat. Bridge is out.
The voice of the engineer was shaking. Kyle slumped back in his seat. He was trembling so hard his teeth chattered. He picked up the mic. "Control, this is Signal 4, he rasped.
Signal 4. Kyle, where have you been? We lost you for 10 minutes. We have a report of a fire at Sanders Creek.
Yeah, Kyle said, staring at the flames reflecting in his windshield. I'm on scene. Silver Star is safe. They stopped short.
Copy that. Emergency crews are rolling. Good work out there.
Kyle stared at the empty track where the ghost train had vanished. I didn't do anything, he whispered. An hour later, the scene was a chaotic light show of flashing red and blue. Fire trucks sprayed foam onto the smoldering remains of the trestle. Police cars blocked the access roads. Kyle stood near the lead locomotive of the Silver Star, drinking coffee from a styrofoam cup that a paramedic had shoved into his hand. The engineer of the Silver Star, a burly man named Henderson, was sitting on the step of the locomotive, smoking a cigarette with shaking hands. He looked up as Kyle approached. You see it? Henderson asked quietly. Kyle nodded. I saw it. Came out of nowhere, Henderson said, his voice dropping to a whisper so the nearby state trooper wouldn't hear. Right in front of me. Old steamer. Looked like a 484 Northern. I slammed on the emergency, thought I was dead. Thought we were going to telescope right into the back of it. Henderson took a long drag. It led us right to the stop. If I hadn't seen that taillight, if I hadn't seen that engine, he gestured toward the burnt-out bridge, we'd be in the creek. Yeah, Kyle said. We would be. Henderson looked at Kyle. Dispatcher says the switch at South Bend was glitching. Says you were out there. I was. Did it come from the siding? Kyle looked at the ground. He thought about the report he had to file. He thought about the mandatory drug tests, the psychological evaluations, the fit-for-duty hearings. If he wrote down that a ghost train from 1944 broke the laws of physics to save the Silver Star, he'd never work on the railroad again. Henderson wouldn't either. Must have been kids, Kyle said, his voice flat. Vandals. I saw a truck leaving the scene. Probably messed with the switch, confused the signals. Maybe they set the fire too. You saw the smoke, that's why you stopped. Henderson looked at him for a long moment. The fear in his eyes was replaced by a dawn of understanding. He nodded slowly. Right, Henderson said. Smoke. I saw the smoke from the bridge fire. Thick smoke. Looked like a train in the dark, maybe. Tricks of the light. Tricks of the light, Kyle agreed. But we stopped in time, Henderson said, flicking his cigarette butt into a puddle. That's what matters. That's what matters. Kyle turned and walked back toward his truck. The rain had started again, a gentle drizzle that hissed against the hot metal of the fire engines. He looked back toward South Bend siding, hidden now by the curve and the trees. The old story said the spirits were restless because of the injustice of their deaths. They were trapped in a loop, replaying the crash, trying to finish the run. Tonight, they hadn't just finished the run. They had finished the job. They had ensured that what happened to them didn't happen to anyone else. Kyle climbed into his truck and started the engine. He glanced at the passenger seat. His keys, the ones for the switch padlock, were sitting there. Next to them lay a small, charred piece of coal. He hadn't put it there. Kyle picked up the coal. It was cold now, but it left a smudge of soot on his thumb. He rolled it in his fingers, then placed it gently in the cup holder. Signal 4 to control, he keyed the mic. Go ahead, Kyle. I'm clear of the scene, heading back to the yard. Copy that. Rough night, huh? Kyle looked at the coal, then out at the dark, wet world. Yeah, he said. But everything's clear now. Signal is green. Roger that. Drive safe. Kyle put the truck in gear and drove away from the smoke and the lights, leaving the ghosts of South Bend to finally, truly, rest in peace.